Uh, Hi guys, just let me know if I'm audible and visible to all of you, and if the screen is also visible. We'll just start in a couple of minutes. Cool. First of all, I'll just give a brief introduction about myself. My name is Akshat Agarwal, and I'm a first year student at National Law School. And I'll basically be discussing some basic concepts of critical reasoning with all of you. And I know that you've been through Namya's video. I hope you have been through Namya's video. She also explained how to tackle CR questions. So, what we're basically doing and what NLTI has planned for you guys is that we'll be launching a crash course sort of a thing on critical reasoning, where it'll basically be lectures on different topics of critical reasoning, such as premises and conclusions, weakened statements, assumptions, strengthened statements, and all of that. So we hope that, since this is a demo class, we hope that you all enroll for that, and you get experience. I think, to the best of my ability, I'll try to tell you how to navigate through CR questions and basically how to get to the answers quickly. But in throughout these lectures, we will also be covering some key concepts of critical reasoning. So the idea is that you are not required to, learn these concepts. As in, the CLAT paper will obviously not ask you, okay, what is a premise, what is a conclusion, not those kind of questions, obviously. But the questions which the CLAT paper does ask you, it somewhat requires an implicit knowledge of all these concepts, right? So I think we have our participants. We'll just start, and at any point, if you have any questions, you can just directly put them up in the chat box. I'll be very happy to respond to them. So I hope you understand why we are doing this. The thing is that, see, if you look at the paper of critical reasoning in 2022, which was the June paper I'm talking about. Now, in that paper, a lot of questions which were asked in the CR section were more or less like RC questions, because they're mostly about which statement is true, which statement is false, and the questions were about central idea, main argument, and all of that. Whereas if you look at the 2023 paper, which happened in December, the questions were the standard CR questions. So those questions were basically like, okay, the question is directly asking you to, okay, weaken the author's position or strengthen the author's position. And there were also questions like, okay, which of the following will the author most agree with or most disagree with? So all those things are there. And but the basic thing that you have to keep in mind, there are some things which are generally consistent throughout all passages that you'll read. So this applies to your RC passages as well and CR passages as well, which is why in this lecture, our first topic would be to cover premises and conclusions. So in this lecture, we'll talk about what is a premise, what is a conclusion, and how important it is to identify and understand a premise and a conclusion, because this will actually help you understand what the author is talking about. Because even in your RC section, even in your CR section, you need to know what is the author's position, what is the author saying, what is the author not saying. So this is something which I hope we'll cover during this session. So these are a couple of things that we'll go through. We'll understand what is a premise. We'll understand how to identify a premise. Then what is a conclusion? How do we identify a conclusion? And I'll also teach you why this whole lecture is very important. The reason why this is important in a nutshell is that, this forms the base for the topics that we'll cover in future in the crash course, basically. That is the assumption questions, weakened questions, and strengthened questions. And in general, this forms the base for all to answer all those questions, such as what is the central idea of the author, or which of the following statements will the author disagree with, or which of the statements will the author agree with. So all of that requires an understanding of, okay, what is a premise in a passage, or what is the conclusion of the author. And this is another topic, which is counter premises. Counter premises will tell you more about the author's position, the nuances. However, we will not cover counter premises in the demo lecture. We'll cover them in the actual crash course, which I hope you all enroll to. So I think let's just jump into it. Okay, so first we'll understand what is an argument in critical reasoning. So the point here is that whatever passage that you're going to get, it is bound to have some premises and it's bound to have some conclusions. So to put it in a very basic manner is that in critical reasoning, the author's argument is basically a combination of different premises, and then the author makes a point. That making a point is called the author's conclusion. Whereas the reasons that the author gives for that point, or for that argument, or for that conclusion, is what we call the premise. So with this basic knowledge, I hope we're on the same page. And when you see this lecture, don't just reserve it for critical reasoning. You can also apply this to reading comprehension questions as well. So all this you can keep in mind while trying to understand a passage in general. Now coming to what is a premise. So so basically what a premise does is, a premise is basically something which tells you, okay, so this is why the author is saying these things. So if you've been through some passages in your critical reasoning sections, or in some mock papers, or of the past year papers as well, a few things will be common, that the author will present you some information, and on the basis of that information, the author will make an argument. So what a premise is, basically, it could be a set of facts, it could be a set of observations that the author is making, or it could be some evidence which the author provides to justify or lend support to the conclusion of the author. The author's objective here is that the reader should believe what the conclusion is. So in order to make you all believe and be convinced with the conclusion, the author will give you certain reasons. So okay, this slide is a bit messed up. That's not how I formatted it, but okay, whatever. So in this slide, if I take a very simple example, just look at these letters and look at this. So if I say that it's a known fact that event A, there's an event A, and that event A leads to event B. This is a fact which the author states in the passage. The author also states that, okay, apart from this, there is an event B. That same event B leads to event C. And now, on the basis of these two premises, the author is drawing a logical conclusion that, okay, since A leads to B and B leads to C, the conclusion is that A also leads to C. So the author will argue that, okay, my argument is that event A is leading to C, and the reason he has provided is A leads to B and B leads to C. So these two are the premises of the author, and the conclusion is A leads to C. So that's how, in a nutshell, premises work. We'll look at a couple of more so we'll look at a couple of more examples to better understand how this premises and conclusions work. So, okay, I hope all these three examples are visible to you. So, if you take a look, you can pause the video if you want and just read these three statements. These are very small statements, but they'll give you an idea of what a premise is and what a conclusion is. So, you may pause the video if you wish. I will continue with my explanation. Please pause the video if you want more time. So, if you look at the first statement, it talks about identical twins having different IQ test scores, and they inherit the same genes. So there must be some environmental factors at play. Now, try to identify the premises in this statement. So, first, look at what the author is arguing. The author is saying that okay, in when we took a test of identical twins, they turn out to have different IQ test scores, but identical twins also have the same genes. So what the author is saying is that genetics are not the only thing that determine IQ scores or determine your IQ. There might be environmental factors at play. So this is the conclusion of the author. But how is the author deriving this conclusion? It's based on these premises that okay, identical twins have different IQ scores. This is my one premise. The second premise is but identical twins have the same genes. So on the basis of these two premises, I'm concluding that okay, they have the same genes but different test scores. Therefore, there must be other factors at play, and that other factor may be environment. Let's say whatever. So that's how you spot the difference between what's a conclusion and what's a premise. Now, coming to the second point. So the second question says, the second statement says, we'd better leave now. If we don't, then we might miss the flight and be stuck here all night. So now this is a very general statement which maybe the speaker is making, but the speaker's argument is we have to leave now. Now the question is, why do we have to leave now? The speaker is providing reasons that if we don't, then we'll miss the flight and be stuck here all night. So this becomes the premise. So just to point out another thing here, it's not necessary that the conclusion will always come at the end of the passage. It may also be that the conclusion of the author comes in between. So, like in this second statement, the conclusion comes first, and then the author cites the premises. So, this may happen in a lot of passages as well. The main point or the main argument or the central theme of the passage may be stated in the first few paragraphs, whereas it may not be, and in the next few paragraphs, the author will cover the premises. So, that is another thing which you need to keep in mind. Now, I'll just clear the screen just a minute. Yeah, now coming to the third statement. Now, here the author is arguing that public libraries should be funded in every community. Now, why should they be funded? Because they provide learning resources for all ages. This is one premise. And the other premise is, and they provide safe spaces for people to read. So, if you look at it, if you are able to identify the conclusion and the premises of the author, you'll be able to understand, okay, what is the point that the author is trying to make? So, in the third statement, the point that the author is trying to make is that public libraries should be funded. Now, why is the author saying that? Is because of these two reasons. So, that's it. There you have your premises and you have a conclusion there. Now, let's just move on to the next slide. Right. So now I'll give you a couple of words which you need to keep in mind while you read a passage, because these specific words usually introduce a premise. So the reason why I'm giving you this list of words is that if you come across them in your be it any passage that you're reading, it could be RC passage, it could be CR passage, or whatever. If you come across that, you can mark it and you can be sure that, okay, if the word because is used, then after that, the author is giving me a premise. The author is giving me some sort of reasons for that, for whatever his argument is. So if we look back at our previous slides, take a look at statement third. Now, in statement third, you can see the word because is used. And after the word because, the author is giving the premises. So if you have a good hold of these identifier words, you can mark them in your passage when you're reading them. And when you do that, you'll be certain, you'll know, okay, this is what the author is going to talk about, and this is the premises and the reasons that the author is providing. So words like because, for, since, these are very commonly used in passages. And when you read CR passages more, you'll get a hang, okay, this is a sentence which I need to focus on. because it begins with a word such as because it begins with the word such as since. So when you're skimming through a passage in RC and CR, it's not necessarily true that you may be able to read the entire passage with the same focus and attention. But if you look at these words, they will indicate, okay, focus here. This statement is important because the word since has been used here. So that's why it is important to note the words which indicate a premise or a conclusion. Okay, now I have a passage here, and I'll ask you to identify what is the premise of the author, and use the identifier words which I talked about. So if you look at the list, the words were some of the words were because, since, and all of that. So try to find out those words, and you'll understand. Okay, what are the reasons that the author is providing for a particular claim? And on that note, just another point, that in a passage, the author can have multiple premises and multiple conclusions. So it may not necessarily be true that okay, only the author only has one conclusion. It may be that author makes several claims within the passage, and for those claims, the author provides several premises. So if you look at this JNU passage, so these lines which talk about okay, the month of September, student union elections, and all of that, different political climate, all of this is actually background information. So this also happens. I'll also explain what a background information is in a passage in order to set the context, in order to set the tone of the passage, and basically to introduce you to the main argument of the author. The author builds some context. So while the author builds this context, the author will provide you some background information. So when you finish reading this passage, you will understand that okay, all this information, it may not be a premise per se, but it's important for me to understand what the author is talking about. Now take a look at this word. Excuse me. And since the university elections are held in the national capital. So now if you notice that the word since has been used, this means that the author is giving me a reason. And the reason is that, now, why is the author giving me a reason for this claim? The author is claiming that these universities have always been closely followed annual events. So, like, these events are very popular. Elections in DU and JNU, the author is arguing, are quite popular events, and it involves the interests of a lot of politicians and policymakers as well. Why is it so? One reason that the author gives is because they happen in the national capital. So now you understand that in the passage, one premise is that, okay, the university elections are held in the national capital. And this premise supports which conclusion? It supports the conclusion that, okay, these events are closely followed and they're very popular and all of that. Now, this is in continuation to the previous paragraph itself. If you look at these lines, now here, look at this paragraph, the second paragraph. The author is arguing that the current situation with these JNU and DU elections is quite unique. That is the argument, that is the claim of that the author is making in this paragraph. Now, how do I identify that? Okay, that was a claim because the author is providing reasons to support that claim. So if the author is making a statement and then subsequently the author provides reasons which support that statement, you can say that, okay, the first statement was a claim and now the author is giving me the premises. So the word for is an indicator of a premise. So here the author is explicitly stating, okay, the reason behind this unique situation is that there is administrative apathy. So the author is saying that this situation, the current scenario with the DU and JNU elections is very unique. Why is it unique? Because there's some administrative apathy behind these elections. So I think that concludes this paragraph. Now we'll come down to what is the conclusion. So while discussing premises, I've already discussed what a conclusion is, but let's just take a look at conclusion separately. Okay, yeah, again, for some reason the formatting is messed up, but no problem. So, okay. So the structure remains the same. The author makes a point, and to support that point, the author provides premises. Now, a conclusion is basically something which is supported by the premises, but the conclusion may or may not itself support another conclusion. So it may so happen that the author is arguing a lot of things, and for argument one, the author provides a couple of premises, and for that argument one, it further supports another argument. So it may happen that a conclusion itself can be a premise as well, and it can be a conclusion as well. So it can go both ways. Now, if you look at again, it's the same structure basically. A leads to B, B leads to C. These are my premises. And the conclusion on the basis of these premises is that A leads to C. So that's my conclusion. And to support that, I have provided two premises. So these are a couple of more examples. Uh, it's pretty straightforward, really. So if you look at the first statement, it says they were a bad employee. Now, uh, why were they a bad employee? Because they did not treat customers with respect. So the argument of the author here is that they were a bad employee, and the reason supported for that is that they did not treat the customers right. So that becomes my premise. After now, notice the word because. So the word because has introduced a premise, and because of that, like my conclusion was they were a bad employee. That gets supported. Now look at the second Tokyo question. So, in the Tokyo question, you will see that the author is stating, giving a fact that okay, Tokyo gets this much of rainfall. Then the author makes a statement that average rainfall is a good indicator of whether a city is raining. And on the combination of is my screen clear? I hope so. Okay, and on the combination of those premises, the author is saying that Tokyo is a rainy city. So, this statement that Tokyo is a rainy city is the conclusion of the author. Now, okay, so this, I'll skip the third statement because it does not appear to be visible. So, I'll say ahead. Okay, now we look at a couple of words that will help you identify a conclusion in passage. So, like we looked at the words in premises, we'll also look at the words which which will tell you, okay, I have to focus on this because this is the conclusion of the passage. These words are particularly very important because in RC and CR passages, you get this kind of questions. Okay, what is the central idea of the author, or what is the main argument of the author? So it becomes easier to solve these questions if you keep a track of okay, what are the claims that the author is making. So the claims of the author may be indicated by these words. Therefore is a very commonly used word. Thus is a commonly used word. Consequently, as a result, all of that. You may pause the video and take note of these words. And this is not an exhaustive list, by the way. There can be a lot of words which indicate a conclusion. But since these are the most commonly used words, so I have put them here. And same goes for the premises as well. The premise list was also not completely exhaustive. It may be that you might encounter some new words that introduce a premise. So keep an eye out for that. So if you look at this second statement, which is the Tokyo statement, it talked about okay, the average annual rainfall is strong, therefore. So the word therefore has been used in this statement. Now, this word indicates that okay, what the author is saying next is a conclusion. So when you're reading a passage, be it RC or CR passage, keep track of the words which introduce a premise, keep track of the words which introduce a conclusion. So that way you'll be able to skim the passage well. You'll know that, okay, I'll just glance of the passage, but if this word comes up, I'll be more attentive. I'll focus on what this word is talking about. So, yeah. Okay, yeah. So, take a look at these this passage and try to identify, try to solve it uh, using the words which I've told you. And also, so if you're asking a question in the chat box, like try to be like just tell me where you did not understand, like which slide, which page, or whatever. Because the problem is that my screen, I mean, there's some time lag between the messages that you're sending me and where I'm teaching right now. So I may not be able to directly grasp what question you're asking, but just let me know if you want me to, like, after this, I'm done with my explanation. Ask me again in the chat box if you do not understand a particular thing in a particular slide. I'll go back to it. Cool. Okay. So if you read this passage, I hope you have. You can pause the video if you wish. Now, look at the word does. Does a rigorous process underway to vote on which of this blah blah blah, which of these 9 sites is to be designated as the golden spike. So the author is saying that the author is claiming that there's a very rigorous process going on to get this task done. What are the premises of the author? It's basically, the author talks about what will come to be defined as the golden spike, and he also talks about the report of the New York Times. And the main premise is basically this: the beginning marker of the Anthropocene period, as recorded in Earth's layer, is not so easy to determine. Because it's not so easy to determine, the author is saying that, okay, there are like all the people who have a stake in this process. They are studying together, and there's a rigorous process going on to basically help you understand what the golden spike is, whatever the author is arguing here. So basically, my job became very easy if I looked at the indicator words. The conclusion, basically, so the conclusion of the author is indicated by the word does. So you can focus on that. Now this is another passage, a very short passage. This is also pretty easy to spot. Again, the word does has been used. So okay, just since because someone mentioned the word however, one is conclusion. So generally the word however is something which introduces a counter premise. We will discuss the counter premise when you guys enroll for the crash course. You'll get the details of the crash course soon, how much fee you have to pay, and the idea is basically we provide you some very high quality lectures on CR, and we'll cover counter premises is one topic which we have left for that. So do join us for that, and you'll understand what is the significance of the word however, what is the significance of the word but, and all these words which basically show some contrast. So how they're important for critical reasoning, we'll discuss those lectures, but here we'll restrict ourselves for the demo. So yeah, okay. So now this France thing. Now, like I told you, like when I explained you, okay, what a premise could be an observation, a fact. So a premise could also be a report. So the author is basically using the France 24 report to conclude this thing, that there is a need for a balanced guideline. Now, I've not read the entire passage in one go. I just know that, okay, I spotted the word does. I know that, okay, this is what the author is arguing. This is the position of the author. The author believes that we need a balanced guidelines for equitable sharing of benefits. So I've got my main point or main argument of the author easily by looking at the indicator words. So a counter premise is something which I'll take up in the enrolled lecture. It's an important topic, which is why I would request you to be a part of the crash course. Yeah. Now we come to the last portion of our slideshow. Why is it important to identify the premises and conclusions? This may be a very relevant question if you're not been familiar with premises and conclusions and how they're used in critical reasoning, because the CLAT paper, as I mentioned in the start of the lecture as well, the CLAT paper does not, okay, the CLAT paper will not give you the passage and say, okay, what is the conclusion of the author? Or what is the premise of the author? That's not how it works, but the paper does ask you questions like, okay, what is the central idea of the author? It usually happens that the central idea of the author is somewhat related to the conclusions that the author has made or the claims that the author has made. So if you're able to identify the conclusions, you're able to reach your answer very quickly. And there are other questions which are usually asked in RC as well, but they're also put up in CR. What inferences that you can draw? So we'll discuss inferences in another lecture of this crash course. So to guess how inferences work, you need to understand what the premise of the author is. What is the evidence that the author is providing me? So, and then there are questions like, okay, which of the following will the author agree with or disagree with? Again, for those as well, you need to know firstly what is the position of the author. So let's say the topic is about nationalism, then how do I judge? Okay, is the author favoring a certain kind of nationalism, or is the author against a certain form of nationalism? That I can conclude with the help of the by identifying the conclusions of the author in the passage. So that is how important it is to identify premises and conclusions. In addition to that, so this I've discussed why it's important for central idea and main argument questions, and why. So now, so you see, if you see the 2023 CLAT paper, which happened in December 2022, for I don't know for what reason, there were direct questions asking you the classic CR questions, which is which of the following statements will strengthen the author's claim, which will weaken the author's claim, which of the following is assumed by the author. So all these three type of questions, we take them up in the future crash course lectures as well. And all these three kind of questions, they require a knowledge of understanding what is the premise of the author and what is the conclusion of the author. Like for instance, if you want to weaken the author's arguments, then you might want to attack the premise. You might want to say, okay, no, the premise of the author is wrong. That's why this statement weakens the author's argument. Or you might want to say, okay, the conclusion that the author is deriving from the premise is wrong. Or you might want to argue that fine, the premise is correct, the conclusion is correct, but the premise does not lead to the conclusion. So, in order to make these kind of claims, in order to make these kind of answers, you have to first understand what a premise and what a conclusion is. And now, coming to the third point, to better understand the passage as a whole, that is also very essential, because ultimately this entire paper is about your understanding and how you develop an aptitude to solve these questions quickly. So this is I think this is the end of my slides. Yep. Beyond this, we will cover a lot of other topics in CR. My a few lectures will be about inferences, main ideas, central ideas. How do you crack them, and how do you eliminate the wrong options, particularly? So I think if you remember, I urge you to watch Namya's video as well. In she discussed how you have to reach the correct answer by eliminating the wrong ones. So in throughout this crash course, we'll also discuss how to do that. We'll also discuss how you can skim through the passage. You don't have to necessarily pay attention to all the things which are said in the passage. Like I said, like I explained through the indicator words which I used. If I see the word does, since used in the passage, I'll be careful, okay, about the next line. After that, I can just skim through the passage, not a problem. So these are a couple of things which so this lecture will be on YouTube. I think Krishna put up that question. So this lecture will be there on YouTube, but for the upcoming lectures where I will discuss counter premises, where I'll discuss assumptions, strengthen, weaken, and central idea and main idea questions, for that you'll have to enroll with us with our crash course that we'll be launching very soon. So for that will be available only to those students who enroll with us. So I urge you that please be a part of this. We'll also take doubt sessions for CR questions if you are stuck with that and all of that. So I hope this has been a learning session for all of you. You got some basic idea of what a premise is and what a conclusion is. My CLAT score, so I got AIR 5 in CLAT and my score was I think 118 or something, 117, 118. So yeah, I hope this was a helpful session. I hope you understood what was your what is the basic of premise and conclusions. If you have any particular questions which are related to the slides right now, you may ask them in the chat box. I am happy to answer them. And anything at all you may put up in the chat box or maybe in the comment section later on. If I get the time, if I get the opportunity, I will definitely reply to those. So yeah, I think this brings me to the end of my lecture. Thank you so much for joining in. And again, if there are any doubts, just put them up in the chat box. Thank you so much.